Around the world, historians, archaeologists, and other experts are trying to get to the bottom of some of the most fascinating mysteries in human history. Every year, new mysteries are solved, but just as many are uncovered as we get a clearer look back into the past. Number 10. There are thousands of unique and intriguing items housed in Cairo's Egyptian Museum. A small wooden statue of a bird wouldn't normally gather much attention compared to the likes of golden artifacts from the tomb of Tutankhamun and statues of pharaohs. But the Saqqara bird has attracted worldwide attention. Its purpose and origin continue to baffle experts to this day. The statue was found in the tomb of Pade-Imet, located in Saqqara. Saqqara is located not far from Memphis and served as a necropolis during the late and Greek periods. It wasn't only Egypt's powerful and elite that were mummified and buried in shafts beneath the sand. Most of the mummies found here belonged to the middle class, and many were buried in mass tombs, where many people from different families were entombed together. Exactly what kind of tomb this was has been forgotten, but an excavation took place in 1898. Unfortunately, details of the excavation weren't preserved either. We don't know exactly what condition the tomb was in, or where the small model bird was located, but it was brought back to be housed at the museum in Cairo, where it first began to attract the attention of scholars. The Saqqara bird has a wingspan of about 18 centimeters and weighs just 39 grams. It was made from sycamore wood. It dates to around 200 BC, during the Ptolemaic period. What caught people's attention was the strange shape of the bird. The tail feathers of most birds fan out horizontally, but the Saqqara birds are vertical. To modern eyes, it resembled an airplane with a bird's face carved into the front rather than an actual bird. This led to speculation that the Saqqara object may have represented some kind of flying device. The first person to put forward this theory was Khalil Messiah, an Egyptian physician and dowser. He thought the statue looked too strange to be a representation of an animal, and suggested it may have been a model for a glider. He believed that there had once been a horizontal stabilizer sitting on top of the rear tail feathers, and when this was added, the bird would function like a glider. There was no evidence that the stabilizer actually existed, though. Experiments to prove this have been mixed. Some have given positive results, while others suggest that even with the stabilizer, the glider would have been difficult to handle and only would have moved a couple yards. A 2023 study using a scan of the bird and computer simulations proved that it would not fly. Even if the model was theoretically capable of flight, the fact that Egyptologists have only found one small model as evidence that the Egyptians in the classical era were capable of flight seems to suggest this wasn't its actual purpose. But if this wasn't the purpose of the Saqqara bird, that leaves the question of its real function a mystery. Number 9. Linear Elamite is one of the most important ancient writing systems that still remains a mystery to experts. The writing system was used by the mysterious Elamite people between 2300 and 1850 BC, but only a few dozen examples of the writing have been uncovered to date. Deciphering the script might help scholars to understand more about these ancient people who lived in modern-day Iran thousands of years ago. It was around the year 1903 when the first examples of linear Elamite started to be uncovered by archaeologists. A French team of researchers were excavating Susa, Iran. It was believed that this was the center of the Elamite civilization. The Elamites were believed to be one of the most important civilizations in the early urbanization of the Near East, and were neighbors with Babylonia and Sumeria. The linear Elamite inscriptions were obviously distinct from cuneiform. The wedge-shaped markings that cuneiform is famous for were missing. Instead, the script seemed to be made up of a variety of symbols that frequently featured crosses, diamonds, and box-like shapes. The discovery immediately excited scholars, who began to try to crack the unsolved mystery. But in the century after the discovery, only a few symbols could be understood. One of the biggest problems facing researchers was that there was no bilingual translation. The Rosetta Stone, a trilingual inscription which repeated the same information in 3 different languages, had been essential for cracking the Egyptian hieroglyphs, but no such inscription could be found from ancient Elam. There were also a few artifacts that included both linear Elamite and cuneiform, but experts don't believe that the same information was held in both. The inscriptions were not a direct translation to one another either. Another problem was the fact that the Elamite language itself was unknown. The writing system was presumably being used to write Elamite, but researchers had no idea what it might have sounded like or what the grammatical rules for this language were. Elamite is a language that went extinct thousands of years ago and doesn't have any known relatives. In 2022, a team of researchers announced that they had deciphered most of the linear Elamite. The decipherment began with 2 silver beakers, which had actually been held in a London bank for decades. The beakers had been taken from an Elamite archaeological site when the rules surrounding the archaeological digs in that area were loose. Many experts believed the beakers were a forgery, but the team of researchers in the 2022 decipherment believed them to be genuine. Many were optimistic about the decipherment, which began by translating the names of kings and expanded to find the corresponding sounds for 96% of the known symbols. Others were more skeptical. The researchers claimed that linear Elamite was almost entirely an alpha syllabary. This meant that the symbols corresponded to sounds, similar to how letters in the modern Latin alphabet do. At the time, all known languages were at least partially logographic, meaning that individual symbols corresponded with an entire word rather than just a sound. The earliest writing systems evolved from symbols for words. If linear Elamite was an alpha syllabary, it would represent the earliest known example of this form of writing. Number 8. The name Martin Marprelate isn't too well known, especially compared to other writers publishing in the Elizabethan period. But Marprelate had a huge impact on English satire and religion. Who he really was remains a mystery to this day. The Elizabethan period was one of a lot of change for England, not least of all in terms of religion. In the 1580s, what exactly the Church of England was going to look like was still being debated. Many believed that the Anglican Church should continue to follow many of the same practices as the Church in Rome. Others wanted a bigger change. These were the people known as the Puritans. While the arguing continued, the government ruled that the Archbishop of Canterbury would have the power to license and control all the printing presses in England and Wales. This significantly restricted those who wanted to publish anything against the church. But one mysterious individual found a way around those restrictions. In October of 1588, a pamphlet began to appear on the streets of London. It was the first tract written by the mysterious Martin Marprelate. The name was obviously a pseudonym. A prelate is a bishop or another high-ranking church official. Martin's pamphlets would definitely mar or harm these church officials. The pamphlets combined wit, humor, and religious doctrine to make points against the current state of the church. Martin was able to highlight members of the church government and the government of the realm and point out their flaws as well as flaws in their ideas. The attacks could be quite personal at times. For example, he aimed at the low-born Bishop of Winchester, Bishop Cooper, calling him a tub trimmer. He also referred to the Archbishop of Canterbury as his Grease rather than his Grace. But the pamphlets also made sure to focus attacks on their politics and the government of the church. Both the church and the secular government issued statements against the pamphlets and tried to catch the person or people responsible. Church officials published lengthy pieces which didn't have any of the same humor as the Marprelate tracts and wouldn't appeal to the same general audience as the shorter, funnier pieces. The government would hire a group of respected writers to try to mimic Martin's work and attack the writer himself, but as they had no idea who he was, they could only make general attacks against the stereotype of a Puritan. In September of 1589, the printing press that Marprelate had been using was seized. This was a movable press, and the people publishing the tracts had been moving it a lot over the past year. It had traveled around Wales and the English Midlands, being kept in the homes of Puritans and sympathizers, even though what they were doing was considered illegal. The press was found with its owner, John Penry, a Welsh priest. Penry had published pieces arguing in favor of a Puritan church before, but he didn't have the same style or wit as Martin Marprelate. While some believe he may have been responsible for the pamphlets, most scholars believe the culprit was someone else. Number 7. Before modern technology, map makers had to rely on the accounts of explorers and other sailors to draw the coastlines of far-off lands. When those lands were located in places that were rarely visited, a mistake might take decades to be spotted and corrected. This was one of the ways that the Phantom Islands might appear on maps. Phantom Islands are islands that were once recorded on maps, only for later exploration to prove they didn't exist. One of these Phantom Islands was New South Greenland. New South Greenland was first recorded in the account of American explorer Benjamin Morrell during his 1822-23 expedition of the seas around Antarctica. Antarctica had only been spotted by European explorers a few years earlier, and the landmass still mostly remained a mystery. In 1822, Morrell set off in his ship, the Wasp, to explore these new lands. In his account, he wrote about visiting various parts of the ocean surrounding Antarctica. For the most part, the account is unremarkable, although some discrepancies raised alarms. On one occasion, he claimed to have sailed at coordinates that would later be revealed to be deep within the Antarctic landmass, but at the time the area was so unexplored that it was impossible to say for certain what was correct and what was actually factual. But one part that stood out to readers was the discovery of a new land. This land was given the name New South Greenland. Morrell claimed that it had been spotted in the distance from the Crown's Nest. The Wasp tried to get closer, but ice meant that the ship could never get too close. Instead, they followed along its coastline for several miles. Morrell recorded seabirds and seals lying on the land, as well as snow-covered mountains in the distance. The mysterious land of New South Greenland was located in the Weddell Sea, an area that was extremely remote and had only been visited a few times in the past. Even though many of his contemporaries were skeptical, they couldn't say for certain that New South Greenland didn't exist. The fact that Morrell wrote about it only briefly, and deep inside a lengthy book about everything else he saw in Antarctica, made some believe him. But later expeditions would reveal that the island could not have existed. At least one explorer, James Clark Ross, claimed to have seen land around the location that Morrell wrote about, but others were able to disprove the island's existence. Number 6. The Gympie ape is a strange artifact that has puzzled experts and tourists alike for decades. Almost 60 years after it was first discovered, where exactly the artifact originated and what it was for remains a mystery. Gympie is a small city in Queensland, Australia, known for its mining history. In the 1860s, gold was found in the area, creating a gold rush that brought prospectors into the city. But miners weren't the only Europeans to settle in the area, as farmers also made homes for themselves here. The land had also long been the home of Aboriginal Australians. In 1966, a farmer named Dal Berry was working his field on the outskirts of Gympie when he found a strange object. At first, it looked like two large rocks, but on closer inspection, it seemed to have intricate carvings and somewhat resembled a very weathered statue of an ape. Berry didn't know what to make of the statue, but believed the two rocks had once been connected. The smaller piece was the head of the ape, so he cemented this on top of the larger piece. The Gympie ape was then donated to a local museum in the hopes that more could be uncovered about its origin. Apes are not native to Australia, so the ape had to have come from outside sources. A few proposals were put forward. One was that it had been carved by Chinese miners who'd come to the area long before Europeans learned of Australia. Other theories were even more fanciful, suggesting it might be of ancient Egyptian origin and resembled the Egyptian god Thoth. The fact that it was found near an even more mysterious location only made the Gympie ape even more intriguing. This location is known as the Gympie Pyramid. It was first officially discovered in 1975, although locals had known of the pyramid for far longer. The pyramid today lies in ruins and resembles 6 or 7 low terraces. Many stories have been told of the pyramids, including of supposedly mystical properties and people seeing apparitions in the area. While pseudo-historians have suggested it was built by Egyptians, South Americans, or travelers from India, the actual explanation is more mundane. It was a terraced farm created during the 1800s by European settlers. But with people continuing to spread stories about the supposedly mystical properties of the Gympie pyramids and their association with far-off lands, any artifact found nearby has gathered even more intrigue. Very little scientific research into the Gympie ape has been conducted. We know it's made from ironstone, but little other geological investigation has been done. It's also unknown when exactly the statue was created, or even where precisely it was found. This information could be used to determine its origin, whether it was made by early European settlers like the terraced pyramid, or was a more modern creation. A final theory is that the Gympie ape is nothing but a work of pareidolia. The statue is simply 2 rocks that, when put together, somewhat resembled an ape. Restoration work done by the farmer may have emphasized features that were created just from natural erosion. Number 5. In 2020, archaeologists began excavation work on an intriguing tomb located in China's Anhui province. The tomb was believed to be older than the famous mausoleum of China's first emperor, surrounded by the terracotta army. But who exactly was inside remained unknown. Today, scholars have a good idea of who exactly was buried in an intricate coffin over 2,200 years ago, an important figure from before China's unification. The Wuwangdun tomb is one of the most impressive ever discovered in China. It's housed beneath a burial mound some 14 meters high, which would have made it stand out from the surrounding landscape. Buried beneath the mound is a burial chamber divided into 9 rooms, with each one housing intricate works of art and musical instruments. In the central room stood the coffin, inscribed in over 1,000 characters that had originally been written using Chinese ink. The tomb was obviously designed for someone important, and immediately experts wanted to solve the mystery of who that important figure was. Dating the tomb would be the first step to getting to the bottom of that mystery. It was estimated that the tomb dated to around 200 BC, shortly before the end of China's Warring States period. This was a time when the land we know today as China was controlled by 7 different states. By 221 BC, the state of Qin had annexed or taken over the 6 other states, unifying China under one state once more. One of the states that was annexed by Qin was Chu. Chu was one of the geographically largest states, located around the valleys of the Han and Yangtze rivers. Importantly, it also occupied the location where the Wuwangdun tomb was located. The Chu state was known for its artistic expertise, which definitely came across in the artifacts that were buried within the tomb. Many of the items had never been seen in other Chinese tombs. Artifacts included carved heads made from lacquerware, divination turtle shells, and instruments. The tomb also included hundreds of wooden statues. Some of these represented guards similar to the terracotta army, but others were housed in the room dedicated to music and may have represented the tomb owner's ceremonial entourage and entertainment troupe, accompanying him into the afterlife. It wasn't long into the excavation work that some experts began to put forward a theory about who might have been buried in the coffin. Putting together the chronology of the site and assuming that this was in fact a royal resting place, the obvious answer was King Kaoli of Chu. Kaoli ruled the Chu state from 262 to 238 BC. By this point in the Warring States period, Chu seemed to be more focused on the arts than on war, but Kaoli did defeat and annex the Lu state, one of the smaller states to Chu's north. Kaoli was succeeded by 3 of his sons before the Chu state finally fell to the Qin. While the theory that this was Kaoli's tomb began to spread almost as soon as the excavation work began, scholars held back on making any official announcement. But in January 2025, The CCTV announced that the mystery was officially solved. This was Cowley's too. Number 4. After the Second World War, reports emerged of a secret German military base housed in the Antarctic. For a long time, many suspected it was nothing more than a story, but evidence has since proven that this secret base did exist. Its true purpose, though, may remain a mystery. The Schatzgraber base was located on the island of Alexandra Land, a remote island high within the Arctic Circle, which is now part of Russia. Work began on building the secret complex in 1942, but it wouldn't begin operating until the following year. Officially, the base was a weather station and was manned by 4 meteorologists as well as 5 soldiers. At first, this purpose seems to make sense. The weather could make or break a mission. Many ocean vessels had been sunk not from enemy combat, but from coming across poor weather conditions. Making sure the enemy had the most accurate information possible was essential to securing the best chances for victory. There was also the fact that merchant ships were sailing between the Western Allied nations and the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program, making it an important area for German U-boats hoping to sink the supply ships. The Arctic region was popular for weather bases. The Americans, British, and Russians all had weather bases in the region, so it wouldn't have looked out of place for a German base to be located here, even if the territory was technically within the Soviet Union. But less than a year before the Schatzgraber base began operating, it had to be abandoned. The base had to be resupplied by airdrops, and food would occasionally run low. In May of 1944, 2 of the staff members hunted a polar bear and brought it back to the base to eat. The meat was undercooked, and the staff became extremely sick. Only one person, the base medic, hadn't eaten the food and had to contact the Navy to report the incident. All 9 men were evacuated. For reasons unknown, nobody would come to take over their positions, and the base was abandoned. This strange abandonment has left many questioning the true purpose of the base. In 1944, it would have been more important than ever to have the weather information that the base was allegedly gathering. Even if the story concerning the polar bear meat was true, there doesn't seem to be an explanation for why nobody came to replace the crew. One theory is that there was more to the base than just weather research. Number 3. In 1488, Bartolomeu Diaz became the first known person to circumnavigate Africa. The explorer opened up a route that would become one of the most important trade routes in the world. But according to one story, he may have been beaten to this accomplishment by more than 2,000 years. Around the year 600 BC, a group of Phoenician sailors set off from Egypt's Red Sea coast, sailing south and into the unknown. They'd been commissioned by Pharaoh Necho II, who ruled Egypt from 610 to 595 BC. Necho was known for having a large imagination and a lot of ambition, as well as various military campaigns against the Babylonians. He started work on the construction of a canal connecting the Red Sea to the Nile. He abandoned this project when he realized that it would be as much help to his enemies as it was to him, but his mind remained on the ocean. It's known that Necho constructed fleets at a time when Egypt wasn't known for its seafaring abilities. But when it came to an ambitious project to circumnavigate Africa, he decided to work with more experienced people. The Phoenicians were the best mariners of the ancient world. They also had a common enemy with Egypt and Babylonia, making it more likely they would work with the pharaoh. They were instructed to leave Egypt through the Red Sea and return via the Straits of Gibraltar. It was a mission that had never been done before. Nobody in the ancient Mediterranean world knew whether it was even possible. Many believed that Africa connected with Asia somewhere in the south, and that the Indian and Atlantic Oceans weren't connected, but the expedition went ahead. 3 years later, the Phoenicians sailed through the Straits of Gibraltar, or the Pillars of Hercules, as it was known in the ancient times. They brought with them strange stories and proof that Africa was surrounded by water. Unfortunately, the entire adventure is recorded in only one source, Herodotus's Histories. Herodotus was an ancient Greek historian, writing roughly 100 years after the expedition was believed to have taken place. His famous work is one of the most useful sources we have about the ancient world, but it cannot be entirely trusted. Herodotus was known to write down any of the stories passed to him that he found particularly interesting. They didn't have to have a huge amount of evidence to prove that they were true, and he did not always cross-reference his information with other sources. That means that a lot of the stories told in the histories are unlikely to be true. For some historians, Necho's expedition is one of the stories that is more fiction than fact. They point out that there was nothing to be gained by making the circumnavigation, and it was unlike ancient Egyptians to explore for the sake of curiosity alone. They also point out that other ancient writers didn't seem to have heard of the expedition. Chroniclers, writing centuries later, claimed they had no way of knowing what the south of Africa was like, and that information could only come from future explorers. But not everybody has these doubts. Herodotus included some unusual details. The most important of these was that the sailors reported that the sun was seen to the north of them as they sailed west. Herodotus didn't believe this, and it would have seemed impossible to ancient people who had no knowledge of the southern hemisphere. The fact that Herodotus didn't believe it, but chose to include this detail, is revealing itself. But that it lines up with what actually happens after sailing below the tropics makes some historians believe that the Phoenicians actually saw this. If the Phoenician expedition really did take place, the main mystery is why we have no other records of this grand achievement. No monuments mention it, and no contemporary sources include any descriptions. It's possible these may be hidden, waiting to be found by future archaeologists, solving the mystery of whether this voyage ever actually happened once and for all. Number 2. James IV of Scotland was the last monarch to lose his life in battle in Britain. He fell in the Battle of Flodden in 1513, leading his army in an attack against the English. But what happened to his body after this battle is a curious story that ended in a mystery. James had been crowned King of Scotland when he was just a teenager. He was popular within his own kingdom and was known as a Renaissance king. He had ambitions to sponsor the arts and sciences, and also to lead a new crusade. But like many of the kings of Scotland before him, the primary focus of his foreign policy was England. Scotland and England had a typical rocky relationship early in James's reign. He supported a pretender to the throne during the reign of Henry VII, but eventually came around to support him. He was married to Henry's daughter, Margaret, the sister of the future King Henry VIII. With his marriage to Margaret came the signing of a peace between Scotland and England that was supposed to last in perpetuity. But when England went to war with France, Scotland had a choice to make. Scotland and France have been allies since the 1200s, specifically due to their shared enemy of England. So when Henry VIII went to war against the French monarch, Scotland decided to side with its old ally. James wrote a letter to Henry, warning him that if he went to war, he would face a threat from his northern neighbor. Henry ignored this threat and went to war anyway. James personally led the Scottish army to war in the north of England. He had the numerical advantage, but the place chosen to field the Battle of Flodden wasn't the best for the northern monarch. James lost his life in the fight, along with many other Scottish nobles. James's body was taken to London, where it was collected by Catherine of Aragon. She sent James's surcoat to Henry, who was in France, and suggested it might be turned into a war banner, but the question of what to do with the body was more difficult. James had been excommunicated by the Pope, who was an ally of England at the time. He couldn't be buried in consecrated grounds. The Pope eventually sent permission for James to be buried at St. Paul's Cathedral, but for some reason this never happened. James's coffin was left above ground in a priory in Sheen, an area that's now part of Western London. According to a popular story, James's head was later removed by workmen and kept as a trophy by the master glazier of Elizabeth I. When he decided to get rid of it, he took it to Great St. Michael's Church in Wood Street, another London church. There, the head was left in a charnel pit, a place for stray bones and crypt sweepings. The church building was burned down in the Great Fire of London, and its replacement was destroyed during the Blitz. Today, a pub is believed to stand on the site of the old charnel pit, named the Red Herring. As for the rest of James's body, that also remains a mystery. The Sheen Priory was dissolved during the English Reformation, and it's not known what happened to the remains that were buried there. All that's known for certain is that this was a place where James's body was last seen. The location is now a golf course. Some have suggested an excavation to try to locate the king's missing remains, but without clear information about where exactly the gravesite once was, it's unlikely they will ever be found. Number 1. History is full of ancient cities that have been lost to the sands of time. Some of these are only attested to in a few written sources, while others are widely known until only relatively recently, before vanishing without a trace. There are few lost cities as important as the ancient city of Akkad. The Akkadian Empire has been described as the first empire in human history. It was founded by Sargon of Akkad around 2334 BC. For thousands of years, the region known as Sumer had been populated by city-states. Some of these could be very powerful, but their influence was limited to the city and the area immediately surrounding it. Sargon defeated the king of one of these city-states, but rather than staying in one location, he expanded his influence to spread across what had once been many independent states. The Akkadian Empire grew during the reigns of Sargon's son and grandson, unifying huge stretches of Mesopotamia. The empire stretched from the Mediterranean to Iran and from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. For the most part, however, it remained between and around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the two rivers that had made Mesopotamia the cradle of civilization. Sargon is believed to have founded the city of Akkad, the same city that the empire would be named after. It's been attested to in many ancient sources and was clearly an important city for both politics and trade. Descriptions of the city often include mentions of a port or quay, which was very important for transporting goods into the city, as well as transporting armies to the battlefields across the known world. This allowed the Akkadians to expand their influence and to keep the territory under their own control. There was also a significant temple to Ishtar. In the past, a god might have been the patron of a single city. Sargon made Ishtar the deity of his dynasty, making her an important god to the entire temple. Even after the Akkadian Empire fell, its impact was felt by the successor states. The Akkadian kings were glorified and held as what a good king should be like. The city of Akkad itself was also prized even after it was abandoned. Long after the empire fell, a Babylonian king wrote about excavating an old temple at Akkad and restoring it. They believed the Akkadian Empire was so important that it should never be forgotten. But it eventually was, and it wasn't until the 1800s that archaeologists began to understand the significance of this ancient empire. At first, they believed the city of Akkad would be fairly easy to find. But despite over 140 years of searching, no trace of the city has ever been found. A few solutions have been put forward to try to solve the mystery. Some have suggested that Akkad was another name for Babylon, but multiple ancient writers spoke about Babylon and Akkad in the same accounts, making it unlikely they were referring to the same place by two different names. The description of the city's quay has indicated to some that it was located along one of the rivers, and was likely at a confluence between two river points. But others believe that the city instead had extensive canal systems that would have connected to the rivers, but regulated the water flow. Despite these clues, the location remains a mystery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.